So we're now on Daf Pei Vav and Aleph, and we're studying the Mishnah towards the bottom of the Amud. And this Mishnah speaks about where you're allowed to eat the Korban Pesach in a chabura. Shtei chaburos. You can have one Korban Pesach, meaning they shechted one lamb, but as far as Achil is concerned, they divided up into two different chaburot. Shayu ochlim bebayis echad, and they were eating in one bias. So you have two chaburas in one bias on two corners of the bias, or two parts of the room. Is elu hofchines pneim helech v'ochlin. The elu hofchines pneim helech v'ochlin. So they turn away from each other to indicate that they're each going to eat their part of the Korban Pesach, and you have now two chaburas. So you've split one Korban Pesach with two chaburas. And even though, again, as we said before, they were all part of one group on the as far as the shechita of the Pesach is concerned, but when it comes to the achila, they don't have to eat together in one group. They can split into two groups. And even if there's a hefsek between the two groups, for example, Mecham, what they used to do is they used to have concentrated wine. They would heat up some water and pour the water into the wine to dilute the wine. And the Mecham, that's where they kept the hot water. But Emta, it was mamish between the two sides of the room, in the middle of the room, separating between the two chaburas. But it doesn't matter, because the Korban Pesach could be eaten in two chaburas. Kisha Shamosh, this is the waiter, and he begins to eat the Korban Pesach. And Omed Limzo, now he's ready to pour the wine for the Bnei Chabura. Now he's going over to the other Chabura. He belongs to the first Chabura. He's going over to the second one. And he should indicate that he's not part of that Chabura, because he has to go back to his original location where he started eating. So therefore, Kofitz Piv, when he serves the other Chabura, he should close his mouth to indicate that he's not eating the Korban Pesach with that Chabura, because although you can have two chaburas, but once you're part of one chabura, you can't jump ship and pack out and join another chabura. You started eating in one chabura, you have to finish eating in that chabura. Umachzir is panav, and his face should always be, in the direction of his own chabura, to indicate that Chas Shalom, he's not eating in another chabura, in a different location. He should keep his mouth closed until he finally returns to his original chabura, and there he's going to continue eating as he began in that chabura, the Korban Pesach. And this is all an action that's done to make sure that people don't suspect him that he's eating from the other chabura that he's serving. And he's eating from that chabura. Akala, however, a kala, even within her own chabura, she can turn away. In the case of the shamash, he's not allowed to turn away from his chabura. In the case of the kala, she can turn away from her own chabura. And this is because a kala is a little bit embarrassed about eating in front of others, so it's a matter of tznius. Now, the Torah says in Parshas Bo, B'bayis echad ye'ochel. Now, what does that mean? B'bayis echad ye'ochel. B'chabura chadeto ye'ochel. This says the Targum. Means that the B'sar Korban Pesach should be eaten in one chabura. And in fact, that is the shita of Rabbi Shimon, that you're not allowed to eat the Pesach. The Pesach cannot be eaten in two chaburas. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees, and our Mishnah will soon see is a reflection of Rabbi Yehuda. Masnisa mani, Rabbi Yehuda. And Mishnah reflects the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda. The Sadya we learned in the Brisa, it says with regard to Pesach Mitzrayim, it says that al batim asher yochlu oso bohem. So on the one hand, it says batim and yochlu in Lashon Rabin. But on the other hand, it says also b'lashon yachid. Malamed shah Pesach, that there's only one Pesach, because it says also, and it was shechted in one chabur, nechal shtei chaburos. You can have two chaburos, as we saw in our Mishnah, eating from the same minui. In other words, they'll divide up the Pesach, and each chaburu is sitting in its own corner will eat that allotted part. And af v'shtei chabur seems to indicate that even if they're in two rooms or possibly even in two houses, that's also okay. Now the pasuk uses the plural, the lashon rabin, to indicate that they can split into two chaburos, even in two different batim, as we said before. However, a yachid, one individual, is not allowed to eat in two batim, and that's what this brisa is now going to derive. Yachal, I might think, since the Torah allowed the splitting of the chabur into two chaburos, and that's indicated by the yochlu, is then yehei ha'ochel b'shtei makomos. Maybe an individual could start eating in one location and then finish in another. The Korban Pesach has to be consumed within one bias. So it means that according to Rabbi Yehuda, the way we darshan this pasuk, because everything that we just learned is Rabbi Yehuda, the word yochlu or yochal should be written as a verb, an active verb of a person. It shouldn't be written ye achel, it should be eaten as referring to the Korban Pesach. And this is going to be the source for the fact that the Bais Echad is referring to the Yachid, correct, the Yachid, whereas as far as Chaburis is concerned, the Torah is saying Al Habatim, they could be in two different batim.
Forgive me, isn't the idea also that you're not supposed to eat the Pesach alone, and therefore you must eat it at least with two people?
Yeah, that is Rabbi Yehuda's Shita. Let me see. Here it is. Lidas Rabbi Yehuda, ein shochtin es ha-pesach ala yochid. And that's a sugya later on in Daf Tzadi Aleph. And that's derived from a pasuk in Bo. It says, "Lakachu ushcheno." Hu ushcheno means that each chabura can take one seh, but a yachid, because it's not hu ushcheno, is eno shochet es pesach. He doesn't shech the Korban Pesach. And that's also derived from a pasuk of Suchal Lizboach es pesach bi'echa. Now, that law is a law in Shechita. Now we're talking about a case where there are many people who are part of the minui on that Shechita. Now they're splitting into two chaburos. And Rabbi Yehuda, who again would not allow you to check the Korban Pesach on behalf of one person, but if there are many people and we're checking it on behalf of many people, are those people stuck together like glue as far as the achila as well, or they can split for the achila? And Rabbi Yehuda is learning from the word yochlu that the lashon rabin and yochlu means in two chaburos, and the also indicates that there's one Korban Pesach that's being eaten in two chaburos. The Gemara is going to go through yeshem lemikri, yeshem lesoros. We'll hold off on how he darshans the word yochlu as opposed to ye'achlu, which is Rabbi Shimon. But in any event, the main point that I want to emphasize here is that although yochlu refers to the chaburos, and they can split into two chaburos, but the individual cannot begin to eat his Pesach in one bias and then continue and complete the achila in another bias. Again, it has nothing to do with the shechita. Mikan Amru, based on this drasha, Hashamash she'achal kizayis b'tzad tanur. Knows as he was hanging around the oven where they were roasting the korban pesach, and he ate a kizayis, so now he wants to eat more than a kizayis. Ipikeachu v'mali kreso mimenu. If he's eating and he's a smart guy, he should eat as much as he wants to eat right there, standing next to the oven. Why? Because as soon as he moves out of that place, he can no longer eat the korban pesach. Because as we said, you can't eat the korban pesach in two makomos, according to Rabbi Yehuda. We're going according to Rabbi Yehuda. However, if they decide that they want to be very good to him, they'll bring over their whole kit and caboodle, the whole su'uda with the korban pesach, and they'll sit down next to him. And now he can continue eating because he's eating in the same place where he started eating. Elu, all these words are divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Shimon Omer, alabatim, he darshans the posuk alabatim asher yochlu oso bohem. Melamed she ha'ochel ochel b'shnei makomos. So again, the word batim is in Lashon Rabin, which means many different batim. The word yochlu, we said, was in Rabin. And that indicates a chabura of many people. But Rabbi Shimon interprets it that one person amongst that chabura can relocate and continue eating his korban pesach elsewhere in two makomos. But the chabura per se is not, you can't divide the chabura. The chabura has to remain intact, as we'll see at the end of this brisa, which is here on the top of Pei Vav Amud Beis. Yochel, I might think that just like each and every one of the Bnei Chabura is allowed to eat his chelik in two makomos, according to Rabbi Shimon, again, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that's a no-no. I would think Yehi Nechal B'Shtei Chaburos. Maybe if each individual could relocate himself, why not we just take the whole group, split it in half, and we'll have two different chaburos? Talmud Lomar, no, the pasuk says that's excluded. V'bayis echad ye'achel, and the word ye'achel here in Lashon Nifal is coming to teach me that the Pesach should be nechal b'bayis echad, and the Torah is being very makpid that when the Achila begins in one makom with one chabura, and once they began, that's where the chabura is. Although one individual again can decide that he wants to eat the balance of his portion of the korban pesach elsewhere, but they cannot split the chabura into two. So let's just summarize that there are two. It's a double machlokas here between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. Number one, if they brought the Pesach to the Bnei Chabura, Rabbi Yehuda says they're allowed to split when the Pesach is brought out into two chaburas, and they can eat it in two chaburas, or for that matter, in two bat. Rabbi Shimon says no. Once they bring out the Pesach, the chabura has to remain intact like glue, and they have to eat it together. Second nafkamina, if they brought the Pesach in front of the Bnei Chabura, and there is part of the Korban Pesach is in a different place. Like let's say, for example, you have part of the Pesach that was brought from the tanur, from the oven, and put on the table in front of the chabura, and another part of the korban Pesach is still in the oven. It still hasn't been totally roasted yet. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, all the extra basar that was brought to another place, that has to be brought back to the same place, because Rabbi Yehuda doesn't allow you to start eating the korban pesach in one place and finish in another place. Whereas Rabbi Shimon would allow it. A member of the chabura can relocate and continue eating the balance of his portion of the korban pesach in another location. So every single one of the bnei chabura, according to Rabbi Shimon, is permitted to go from wherever he's located to the Makom Hetzliah, to the place where the oven is, and he can eat there. And that's not called shtei chaburos. Shtei chaburos is when you actually split two groups. But here we're talking about one individual who's part of the chabur, and there's only one chabur, and he wants to continue eating in another makom. Reb Shimon allows it. The Maikom Miflagi, what are they arguing about? Reb Yehuda Savar Yesh Aim L'Misores. In other words, we look at the ksav. The ksav means the way that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote the Sefer Torah, and he gave it, he transmitted it to Israel. That is the ikar. And therefore, we see the word yochal, and it's written with one yud, and we read it with two yuds, as if, I'm sorry, since it's written with one yud, so therefore we're going to read it as yochal. Yochal, not ye ochel, but yochal. And what it means, v'bayis echad yochal, it means that a person should eat the Pesach b'bayis echad. In other words, in one makom, he cannot relocate himself to continue eating the Korban Pesach elsewhere. Rav Shimon Savar Yeshem Mikra, that what is primary is the way you read the word in the Torah, not the way it's written. And the way it's read, we don't read it as yochal, but we read it as ye ochel, even though it doesn't have the extra yud. And that's coming to teach us that in Ochinami, you can eat the Pesach in another place. He can pick up his feet and relocate himself to another place, and he can eat the Korban Pesach. But it has to be but one chabur. So now the Gemara is going to give two other nafkaminas between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. One is called Asiyas Machitza, and the other is called Siluk Machitza. So let's go one by one. First is Asiyas Machitza. You had a chabura, one chabur, Yoshman. They're sitting together in one place. And then all of a sudden, Nifrisa Machitza, they took some sort of a, in Hebrew it's called a machzeles, and they set up like a curtain almost, a nehem, splitting the middle of the chabura. And now it turns out that you have a group on this side and a group on that side. Well, that's okay for Rabbi Yehuda. The Divrei Omer, Pesach Nechal B'Shtei Chaburos, even though the Hefsek Mechitza, Nifrisa Mechitza now separates them into two Chaburos, Ochlin. They're allowed to continue eating because you're allowed to eat in two Chaburos. Obviously, Rav Shimon would not allow this. The Divrei Omer Eina Pesach Nechal B'Shtei Chaburos Ein Ochlim. You've now used this parochas, this nifrisa, to split between half of the chabur and the other half of the chabur. They can't eat it now because you're not allowed to continue in setting up two different chaburos. So we're going to have to remove this mechitza. Now we have the opposite case, which is called siluk mechitza. Yoshvin. There were two different chaburos that were eating from two different psachim in two different houses. And then nistalka hamachitza b'neihem. This is called siluk mechitzos. So they removed the mechitza that separated these two rooms. I guess it was like a portable mechitza. Now, what happens is when you remove the mechitza, now it's considered that they're all sitting together, right? The airspace now is expanded. Because when there was a mechitza, the airspace of each chabur only reached up to the mechitza, but now you remove the mechitza and the airspace is expanded. And now it becomes as if they started eating the Korban Pesach in one place, and now they're eating it and continuing and completing it in another place. According to Reb Shimon, and Reb Shimon is of the opinion that ochel b'shnei makomos is no problem if an individual wants to continue his meal in a different place, ochlin. So even though with this siluk mechitza, you now have a new makom, but nevertheless it's okay. It's shnei makomos, which is fine according to Reb Shimon. But l'divrei Omer according to Reb Yehuda, eina ochel b'shnei makomos. You're not allowed to eat the Korban Pesach in two different makomos, and if this siluk mechitza creates a new makom, is ein ochli. we're going to have to reestablish the mechitza, put it back to where it was before, replace the mechitza between these two chaburas. Yosef Rav Kahana kapasha le mifshat, and Rav Kahana accepted la halacha these two nafkaminas, and he says that bnei chabura in the case of nifritza mechitza beinehem, where they set up a mechitza, is then they become two chaburos, which means that according to Rabbi Yehuda, they can continue eating the korban pesach. According to Rav Shimon, they have to get rid of that mechitza. They cannot continue. And in the case of two chaburos that were sitting in two different places, and they were separated by a mechitza, now they removed the mechitza, now they have a new makom, is according to Rabbi Yehuda, that would be also, and according to Rabbi Shimon, it would be mutter. Amalei Rav Ashi Rav Kahana, you shouldn't have been so sure about it. Tiboy l'chachiboy, you should have asked it in a lashon of a suffix. Siluk mechitza v'asiyas mechitza mi havi kishnei makomos or kishnei chaburos dami olo. In other words, what is the status of siluk mechitzas and asiyas mechitzas? Very interesting that Rav Ashi put siluk mechitzas first. He switches the order around. There's a whole long discussion about this. Now we get back to the Mishnah. Now the rest of today's daf is all what we call derech eretz. Hakalo feches panel my timer. Or Rav Chia bar Abba Rav Yochanan mipnei shehi busha. Bosha. She's embarrassed to have people watching her eat. And now the Gemara tells the story. Rav Huna, brother Rav Nosson, Ichla lebei Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. So the whole story we're going to learn now is about Rav Huna. Amru, the members of Rav Nachman's, the host's household, they spoke to Rav Huna, Mashmecha. What's your name? They didn't know him. They didn't recognize him. Amalahu Rav Yehuda. Call me by a rabbi. Then, Amru, Nesev Mara Puria. We're going to give you a special place to sit, a makom mechubad, on a bed, on a couch, instead of sitting you on the floor. Yes. So he sits up on this very high, luxurious mechubadika place. Yavulu kasa. They brought him a glass of wine. Kable bechad zimna. He didn't refuse. He immediately took it without hesitation. And he takes the cup right out of the hands immediately. And he drinks it. How did he drink it? There are three possibilities. You can either drink it in one gulp, the whole cup. You could drink it in two gulps, or you could drink it in three gulps. So he drank it, betrays him in two gulps. Below Hadar, Hadar Ape. He didn't turn the other way. He drank right in front of them, face to face. Usually it's more derech eretz if you out of humiliation and humility, I should say, not humiliation. Out of humility, you turn the other way around so that they don't see you drinking. Now, after he calms down, they wait a while. Amrule, so the Bnei Bayis start questioning Rav Huna. My time of Karislach, Rav Huna. Why'd you have to add the appellation Rav? I mean, you're asking for cover. Amalahu bal shemani. Now, here's an interesting comment in Rabbeinu Bachai in his commentary on the Torah, and he has a Kabbalah. It's a whole long thing here that Rav Huna knew the Kodesh, Shem Kodesh of Ben Mea Osios. When he called himself a Baal Shem, he knew the name of 100 letters. That's like the holiest name of God, the Tetragrammaton. And therefore, because of his relationship with the name of Hashem, it's appropriate to call him Rav. My timer ki amru le nesiv hapuria yasvis. Why did you immediately take us up on the offer, to get the most mechubadik place to sit? Amalahu we have a principle in Derech Eretz, Kol Mashi Yomul Chabal Bayis Aseh. Whatever the Baal Bayis tells you to do, you do. So you don't ask questions. He told you to sit here, sit there. He gave you to sit. Now, Lamaisa, I don't know. People are not knowing this way. If you ask someone to sit up front, they'll back off. But Rav Huda said, "Ein mis kol mashi yom l'cha Baal Bayis aseh." My tamik yovas leikosa kablos b'chad zimna. Why did you immediately accept our offer of a cup of wine? You have someone who's lower on the echelon, then you could refuse it and show off your humility. But we don't refuse a gadol. And you are gedolim. You gave me, you're people of great stature. You gave me the cup of wine. It wouldn't be respectful if I refused the offer. There's no room for refusing. My time is to say betrays him and tell us once we're at the topic, why did you drink it in two likimos, two gulps? Amalahu, Rav Huda answers, this Sanya we learned in the Brisa, Shosa Kosa Masachas, someone who gulps it down immediately in one gulp. Hareza Gargaron, he looks like a gluttonous person. Vishnayim Derech Eretz, Bishlosha Migase Aruach. If you drink little sips at a time, you're like a feinschmecker. You're putting yourself up on a high pedestal. That's called gase aruach. You're a bal guy. So therefore, the derech eretz is to drink the wine in two gulps. My time why did you look us in the face and drink without turning your back? The Mishnah says that a kala is meant to turn her face around. Only a kala. But a ish, a regular person, a man, should not turn his back to the people who are offering him a drink. Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yossi, Ikla, Lebe, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yossi ben Lakonya, Yavile Kasa, Kivle Bechad Zimna. They offered him a cup of wine. He immediately took them up on the offer without refusing. Vishasye Bechad Zimna, but he drank it in one gulp. They turned to Rabbi Shmuel. They said, "Lo savale mar." What about the brisa? Shose kosav asakas or is a gargaron? If you drink it in one gulp, it's like you're a gluttonous person. Amalahu lo amri. When do they consider you a gargaron? If it's a small cup. Second. Lo amru, I added the word Ella here in my mind. Lo amru, when did they say? When did they not say that you're a gargaron? In other words, I'm going to give you the exclusions when you're not a gargaron is be kos chakot. If you have a small cup, drink it in one gulp. Yencha masok, it's a special wine. Ukrese rechava, and a person who has a wide stomach, so to speak. So if it's an average sized cup, and if it's the general wine that's popular out there, it's not very fancy wine, and it's regular wine, and it's an other benini, he has a regular average stomach size. So then, you should not be drinking it down in one. But here, it was a small cup, and it was special wine, and I have a big stomach. All right, we're now going to finish a Mitzvah Hashem, Perek Ketzad Sol. Omer Rav Huna bar B'nei Chabura. Rav Huna says that if you have people who are kovei themselves to eat together a Suda, and they hired a servant, a waiter, and they made an agreement, a contractual agreement that they're going to pay him X amount of money. He's going to be in charge of setting up the tables, and he's going to be in charge of serving the food and the drinks. If three members of this chabura that jointly hired this waiter are eating in a seuda, and once all three that hired him get together and they sit biyachad, then he has to start serving them. If only one or two of them are there, so he doesn't have to feed them prematurely. In other words, the moment that his chiyuv goes into effect is the moment that all three people who hired him are located there ready to eat from his great cooking. However, yotzim achibecha means at the end of the meal, they don't have to finish the meal, all three of them simultaneously. They can leave one at a time. Now, the chiddush here is that he will continue to wait on less than three people. We said at the beginning, at the outset, only when the three show up, that's when he starts his obligation to wait. But there are scenarios in which he will wait on less than three people if one or two of them drop out. Amar Rava, when you tell me that the waiter is obligated to serve that last guy, because Reuven already packed out and Shimon packed out. Now you're left with Levi, you have to feed Levi. That's only on the condition that those who left early. Emphasize the word early. And the last one is leaving at the normal time. But if the last one wants to sit there for hours, he's on his cell phone, he's doing business deals, he's taking his time, then in such a case, Rava says, the waiter is no longer an obligation to serve him. So you look around and, the whole restaurant is empty. There's one guy still eating there. So the waiter basically, he doesn't say this to him. He says, time to go. Point his clock. Nobody's around. Do I have to continue here overtime just for you? Behu the ragesh behu daila. And this halacha that they're allowed to leave one by one, that's only on the condition that the Bnei Chabura will notify the waiter when they sat down up front that they want to go out one at a time. Because again, if they leave one at a time, he's left with one or two people, but he still has to serve them. That's because they notified him at the beginning that we're not leaving together, we're coming together, we're not leaving together. Amar Avina, v'nostin schar damim, those who remain behind, those who packed out early have to pay whatever they agreed to pay the waiter. Let's say they pay the waiter per hour. They left an hour early. So they want to pay for 2 hours and not 3 hours. No, says Ravina, they have to pay for all 3 hours, even though they left an hour early. If, let's say, Achron is who's ever left behind. It sounds like it's in the singular, one Achron, but it could be more than one Achron. Is lahosif dom, they have to give an extra tip to the waiter because they lingered on. So the Gemara rejects this. For less hilchos or kavase, we don't accept the psak of Ravina that they have to add extra payment, but rather the shamash has to serve even if there's one person left without charging him or expecting any extra payment. And the reason is because that's the normal way that you get people together, they're soadim yachad, they eat together, but one stays longer than the other. So if the last guy who's staying is not unduly longing, like the case I gave you before, then it's within the purview of the original contractual agreement and obligation of the shamash to even serve one person. And that one person cannot be billed for an extra price or expected to give an extra tip just because he was the achma. Don't penalize him. But on the other hand, the shamash has to realize that he's obligated to serve that yoch. And Rava made that stipulation that they made this condition from the get-go and notified the shamash when they entered that they want to leave one at a time. Hadron alecha ketzad solin. So Be'ezra Hashem and Hashem tomorrow will begin the 8th parak, Perka Isha. Wishing you a great day.